Hello and welcome to today's webinar from QTI to Test Day, Custom Item Banks and Expanded Student Supports. As we make our way through the webinar, our main goal is to equip you with the knowledge and tools to successfully import and apply settings for custom item banks and student supports within your local assessment system. And now let's take a quick look at the agenda that we will follow today. We will first review QTI and best practices, demo the QTI experience, go over the recent update to manage student supports, and student support auditing. And with that, I would like to send it over to Jeremy to get us started. Jeremy, take it away.
Thank you very much, Armando. Okay, to get us going, we have a quick little icebreaker. Drop your answers in the chat, A, B, C, or D. If you had an extra 10 hours in your work week, you would use it to what? A, actually analyze data trends. B, build robust item banks. C, collaborate with teachers to ensure their assessments actually feel fair in the field. And D, take a very, very long nap. I'll give you a hint. C is not necessarily the correct answer just because it's longest. You know our kids feel that way sometimes. What are y'all thinking? Drop your answer. I got a D, an A, and a D. Take that nap. Yep. Analyze some data trends. Another D. Where I'm seeing a pattern here. Lots of D's and A's. I like it. Valerie admits I want to say D, but yeah, the I'm sure the inner responsibility in many of us would eventually take over and postpone said nap. Awesome. Well, thank y'all for participating in that. I think my personal answer would probably be, considering if was still in a district, it would probably be A. Armando, which one would you pick?
I'm kind of leaning towards C, but that might be because I train unaware.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so let's dive into it. What is QTI? So we have two main portions of our webinar, and Armando highlighted them right at the beginning. We're going to be talking about QTI, but also I'm going to be giving you an overview of a new update we've made to student supports. We actually released that update today. I say that, and I also caution you, don't go like diving into it and go see if you can figure out what's new. Pay attention to the webinar. Stay here locked in with me. I'm going to show you all the coolness, and you can go after we're all done here. But I want to kind of take us through a journey of actually looking at QTI, what it is, how you're going to potentially be able to use it to expand your local item banks and then incorporate those into assessments, and then how the new expanded features we've done with student supports can help you utilize what you're building with QTI. So the first thing I want to start with is really just kind of highlight what is QTI as a whole. QTI can be confusing, and I know this through the path that we've made in actually developing custom banks, which is where QTI lives. Talked with a lot of districts, piloted things with a lot of districts. Some of you are actually in this training right now, or in this webinar right now that we're piloting for us. And there were a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions. So I want to start at the very beginning. QTI is basically test questions in code. The code itself is actually a standard format called XML, which allows assessments and questions to be shared between entities. And by entities, I mean your content vendors and us, or Canvas and us, and whatever vendors that handle or deal with QTI and potentially us. And I've got two images on the screen here. The first image on the top left is an example of what a QTI package actually looks like when it's saved in your downloads folder on your computer. There's a zip file. That zip file is the actual file. So my example here is third grade math QTI example.zip. That's what a package actually looks like unless you crack it open. Caution, italics, underline, bold, this sentence I'm saying right now. Don't unzip your packages. I've done it for this image, but I've only done it for example purposes. If you have a pretty decent background in code and that sort of stuff, like go ahead, unzip it if you want to, but unzipping can only lead to you potentially editing something that doesn't need to be edited and then makes it so that it can't import. And so keep them zipped unless you really, really know what you're doing. But below that .zip file, is an example of what's inside of that zip folder. You have a main folder, another subfolder called test, another subfolder called items. There's sometimes other subfolders like formatting and instructions, that sort of stuff. And then you have a manifest file, and then potentially a how-to or README text file in there as well. And then below that image is another image of what a question looks like in the XML code. You've got there a bunch of gobbledygook about the code that really you can see if you're paying real close attention and focusing in on the black text. This is actually question number 4, and it says Maya has 18 stickers. She gives 7. The question goes off the screen, and then you have your answer choices: A, B, C, D, 11, 21, 25, 21. Uh, that's a bad example question, but hey, that's not what we're talking about. Um, this is what QTI is, and I wanted to really put that out there because QTI is not like a magic ability to scan a PDF or a Google Doc or a Word document and just turn something that is text into a test. That's not something that we have, and that's not what QTI is. With QTI, we're literally turning code into assessments, and that code has been written by some other entity, usually a curriculum vendor. You can think of QTI as like a digital binder. So these are some of the characteristics of a QTI package. This binder, think of it like that 3-ring binder you might have taken to school when you were a kid, to hold everything that you had for your English class, or speech class or what have you. Many of you, you might be teachers and you have your kids, you have binders in your own classrooms, but think of it as that 3-ring binder. That's a zip file. Inside of that zip file, you have things that would go inside of the binder. Think of the manifest as like the table of contents. It's actually an organization file that says, hey, this is kind of how it should be organized when you actually create the test or you import the questions or what have you. And then after that table of contents, you have dividers. And each divider are things like the test folder, the standard data folder, the question folder, the answers folder, the interactions folder, the images folder. In between the dividers are all of the pieces of paper or printed out whatevers that should go in between those dividers. And what we're doing is actually unpackaging that binder and taking all the parts and pieces and making a test out of that code. What a QTI package is not, on the right side of our screen here, it's not necessarily guaranteed to have vetted or quality items inside of it. They're not necessarily standards aligned. They're not guaranteed to have accessibility options and accommodations included. They're not necessarily standardized for format and appearance. I say that last one especially because if you're expecting something because it looks this way in this platform, and then I was able to get a QTI package of that, and then I get it into Eduphoria and it looks slightly different, that's typical and that's normal. QTI packages don't necessarily always follow a format and appearance expectation when they come over. It's really about the core information and then trying to replicate that information in our system. So keep that in mind as you go through QTI. So from QTI package to custom banks, what we're really aiming at is trying to provide more items for your assessment staff, for your teachers, trying to expand that content library for assessments, and trying to diversify assessment resources for varied assessments. I want to stay here for just a minute and talk about custom banks as a concept, which these are all the goals of a custom bank. But how's a custom bank different than your local bank or the item banks that you may have purchased and are using, like Teeks Bank, Teeks Ready, Teeks Resource System, Mastery, the Star Item Bank, those banks? How's a custom bank different than that? Custom banks were built to be an eventual housing place where maybe all banks might be one day. But for now, it's where QTI packages that you import, it's where you actually do that and where you can customize how they're organized. So when you are creating your custom banks and you have all these packages you're trying to import, it gives you a lot of layers of customization on how you provide them to your staff and who has access to them. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. So let's talk about custom banks and best practices before I show you how QTI and custom banks works in the interface. Custom item banks are a varied assessment solution that helps educators to customize assessment libraries, specify access permissions, and import third-party content. So how do we go about setting up your local processes? Here are some things to consider. Big questions to kind of ask yourself. What curriculum resources do we have that actually provide us with QTI zipped files? And where are those located? You might need to take a minute and actually go look it up. Are we contracted with HMH or McGraw-Hill or whatever that curriculum vendor is? And do they provide QTI files? You may know the answer to that right now. You might not. If you don't, go find out the answer. You probably have a local rep you can call or email, and then figure out, how do I get a hold of those? Where are those located? Where are they saved? Another thing you might ask, who in the district should manage QTI files in Aware? This is something that is controlled by a right. Some of your administrators in your district may already have that right. It is manage, sorry, it is, I apologize. I was mixing up the second half of our webinar. So rewind. There's a new right that we've got called managing custom banks. You're going to want to decide who needs to have that right so that they can go into the custom bank interface and then actually go through the process of starting to create your custom banks, importing QTI files, et cetera, et cetera. None of the people in your district have that right on by default. It doesn't come with a role. So decide who should that be in advance and then go give that person that right. You might need to be that person, and so you might have to give yourself that right to go start playing around inside of it, which is totally fine. But ask that question and settle on an answer. Then you might want to ask, who will be able to access custom banks for use on tests? We're going to talk about permissions when we get there here in a second, but it's really good to go ahead and try to answer that question right now. As you make your custom banks, who should have access to those banks when they're creating a test? I want to think through the banks I'm going to create and which level of access I should have, and I want to do that before I start. And you're going to see why here in just a minute. And then what is the local process to evaluate the imported content? Like I said a minute ago, QTI is not necessarily vetted items. It's not necessarily standards aligned items. The people that provide them to you may have promises that they are, and many vendors are very good at doing that. So I want to be very clear. Many vendors are probably very good at providing quality items, but you probably want to vet them for a lot of reasons before you actually make them available for public consumption in your district. And then finally, how do the above decisions actually impact each of the content areas? This is a sweeping thing to actually consider as you're going through because you may have different expectations for access for each content area. Your CTE courses, if you have QTI files for CTE, you may not care if teachers have access to those questions or not because they're off kind of doing their own thing. Whereas math and reading, you really need to restrict it because I want these questions for benchmarking. Think through those things as you find your QTI files and packages and what do I have available and how do I want them delivered? Because the more you think through all of these decisions before you start, the fewer mistakes you're going to make. And you don't want to make mistakes when you're dealing with potentially thousands of items. So let's talk about naming conventions. This is a lesson learned when we were working with Bluebonnet. Bluebonnet assessments are actually provided to all of you through custom banks. The custom bank experience is where we have used the QTI packages provided by TEA to actually load the tests into our system. This is why sometimes when you report an item, it takes a hot minute for those to be revised because it has to go through the TEA system of approval and all of that, and then it has to go through their vendor to make the corrections, et cetera, et cetera. But QTI is how we are doing Bluebonnet assessments. So when we made the Bluebonnet assessment banks, we kind of made a bank per content per grade. You might want to do that too with your setup. You might want to do something very different. You may have larger buckets. You might have entire content buckets, entire grade level buckets, entire vendor buckets, or various combinations of the two. Why do you want to think through your naming conventions before you start? You want to think through that because once you make a bank and load items into it, you're kind of set in stone with the items in those unless you want to go through and start deleting items one at a time. It gets really, really tedious if you have 1,972 items in a bank, like that third line in that image right there. You can delete entire banks and start over. There's nothing wrong with that, but it can be a little later labor intensive to do that. So think through how you want these things named because you don't want to have to go back and redo it all later and then decide which items do I need to yank out now because I changed the name of this bank. Then let's talk about sharing. And I don't mean sharing in the sense that I'm sharing this bank with another district or anything like that. This is sharing in terms of like who's going to get access to these items once they're imported, who's going to get access to the pre-built tests if those are included in your QTI package in the pre-built test table. So think through how you're actually going to control that access. I mentioned before you have a new right, which is manage custom banks, which is district only. This gives access to those people that need it to get into custom banks and manage these things. But each bank has on the bottom left here the access permissions that you can set, and there are two levels for it. You can share access to individual items or the pre-built tests. I want to pause for just a second. I want to make sure we understand and define what is a pre-built test. In your aware navigation on the left-hand side, you should see a pre-built test table. If you've never noticed that before, go check it out. When you click that pre-built test, pardon me, pre-built test link, you'll notice a huge list of tests. A lot of them are star if you're in Texas. A lot of them might be amplify again if you're in Texas. If you're not in Texas, that table is probably empty and will be until you start using QTI packages for pre-built assessments. Pre-built assessments are essentially tests that have been pre-decided. These are the items that go together to make a test. Some QTI packages, not all, but some QTI packages include pre-built packages. The code actually tells us when we're reading it, items 1, 2, 15, 19, 23, and 28 in this bank we just loaded belong together as the Unit 1 test for third grade math or whatever the case may be. That's a pre-built. Check with your vendors. Is the QTI providing you pre-builts? You can actually audit that in the system and see what the pre-builts are and what those look like after you've loaded it if you need to. But knowing in advance is potentially very helpful. So that's the concept of a pre-built. Then you have individual items. Every QTI package, we can offer just the items and the pre-builts, even if the items are included as a pre-built. There can be available individually. So you can manage access to that. And let's say you have a QTI package that has both individual items and pre-built. I just want these to be provided as an open bank to my teachers individually as items, not as pre-builts. Check the access permissions on the individual item line and ignore checking boxes on the bottom. If you leave something unchecked, it will be unavailable. That's also a really big pro tip. So bold, italics, underline this sentence. When you're making a custom bank, and I'm going to say this again here in a minute, when you're making a custom bank, check nothing on the permissions until you're ready for it to be seen. You want to go through, you want to audit it, you want to make sure everything's working the way it should before you check these boxes. But think through who needs access to this bank before you actually start making it so you don't make any mistakes and make things visible that shouldn't be visible before you're ready. Okay, so let's look at the actual custom bank experience. That was, tips and tricks for implementation before you get started. So here's kind of our objective for this chunk. We need to import a QTI package and identify any rejected items with 100% accuracy to ensure that all valid questions are available for assessment authoring. To get started with Custom Bank, the gear icon right next to the item bank, you click that and you see all of the item bank settings. There's a new option available that says Manage Custom Banks. That option will only be visible to people with the Manage Custom Banks right. So go make sure you have that right. Then you can come back. You can click that gear, go click Manage Custom Banks. Texas districts, I mentioned this a second ago. You're actually going to see Bluebonnet custom banks in your table right off the bat. And here's bonus. A lot of you have been asking, I've got feature request upon feature request for this. You want the ability to control access to the Bluebonnet assessment and the Bluebonnet items via district, school, or teacher. Now that you have that managed custom bank table, you can do that. So you go next to that Bluebonnet bank, you click the three button overflow, you go to edit options, I think it is, and you can set the permissions for those Bluebonnet banks. So go check that out if that's something you want. Like that's like an excellent first step, if that's something you want to actually get into. The purpose of the custom banks is to load those QTI item packages into custom banks that you build for teacher and district level assessments. Note as this gets released and you actually get this webinar slide deck, at the bottom of this slide, there's a link that goes straight to the online help guides for custom banks. So go check those out as you go through this. The next thing you might notice, especially if your table is blank, but if it's not blank, that's okay. You've got at the tippy top a button that says Create Item Bank. Go up there, click that button, Create Item Bank, and you're going to get a little modal that looks like this on the screen, and you can actually put in the title of your bank. Again, this is where I'm going to reiterate. Pro tip, when you're making the custom bank, you can go ahead and set permissions right now if you want to. I highly recommend skip access permissions when you're making the bank at first, and then hit the create and continue button. This is going to allow you to load the QTI packages into it, make sure it's working the way you want it to. Then you can go back and edit the properties of the bank and check the boxes for your access permissions so that it's only going to display when you're ready for it to display. Um, Another fun tip. Say you get item packages this year loaded, but then next year the vendor gives you a new set of QTI items. Can I use these access permission checkboxes to actually hide the bank, load the items over the summer, vet them, make sure they're good, and then check the boxes again and make them visible? Absolutely, you can, and I highly encourage that as good practice. If you get new items and you need to vet them before you load them, do it, late in the afternoon when nobody's really trying to make assessments over the summer, over the weekend, what have you. Uncheck all the boxes. It'll hide everything for that custom bank from people to be using it. And then you can vet the new items that you import into the custom bank that you've already got built, and then recheck them when you're ready and to go and actually get those out. Now, you've named it, you've hit generate and create. Now you get another option to actually import your first QTI package. Notice there's a bunch of text here on this window. That text is important. I want to highlight a couple of really big things up here. In gray, this sentence, up to 5 files, each up to 20 megabytes is allowed. There is a hard-coded 20 megabyte file limit per QTI package. QTI file packages are set, limits are set just to keep our system stable. Yes, there are QTI packages that exist out there that are larger than 20 megabytes, but I'll go ahead and tell you, any vendor that can create QTI packages, if you ask nicely, probably should be able to give you smaller packages if you need to. I'm not going to promise that because each vendor is their own entity, but it is something to explore. Before that sentence, you need a .zip file that follows the QTI 1.x and 2.x specifications. We support QTI 2.2 and 2.1 is what we built it towards, but we also notice it does work pretty well with QTI 1.1 and 1.2 as well. So that's the version of the QTI you're looking for. Anything outside of those versions, can't guarantee, can't promise it's going to work. You can do up to 5 files at a time. So say I have 5 math files that I want to put into the same one. You might actually have 15 files. You can do 5 of those 15 in one go, click and drag them in, or click the choose files and manually select them. And then once you've got them picked, you click that begin import button on the bottom right, and it's going to queue them up. When it queues them up, you get this little notice that says import progress. Your upload has been processed. Please review or view the import log. There are a couple of things that you can do here because importing might actually take some time. These things are queued up and processed in order of submission. And so if we have 80 districts trying to do this all at one time, we queue them up to keep the system from crashing, right? So it might take a minute. Go get a cup of coffee, perform another task somewhere else in Aware, go do a walkthrough, whatever it is that you need to do, come back, and then you can look at the import log and check the progress of the import. Um, if you actually go and look at the import log, which I'll show you in a minute, you actually get status chips, a percentage of progress, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Disclaimer down here at the bottom. We have a concept called error logs, and I'll show you where you can get a hold of error logs in a minute. Error logs are for reporting technical issues, not for looking at assessment content. That really is only going to tell you about whether or not the items worked and why they did or didn't work. The responsibility of the content exists between you guys and the vendor that are putting these QTIs into our system. And so something to keep in mind is we don't control what is in the QTI packages. So be very careful about what gets put into the system before you put it onto tests and let students see them. Okay, you've got items in. Now I want to go review them. I've checked the progress, it's 100%. The next thing you're going to do is you'll see a series of tabs once you crack open the bank. You've got a question tab, a resource tab, and a pre-built tab. Any of these things will be populated with things that exist within those. And so if you have like a math test, for example, you may have an empty resource tab, and that's perfectly fine. If you have a package with pre-built tests, you go to the pre-builts, you'll see a pre-built list, and you can click those and explore those before you make them public or release them to your district. But the question tab is where you're going to probably start. And what you do here is you can actually check these items and actually preview them by clicking on the item ID. You can look here at the standards, you can look at the complexity, the status. If you hover over that icon, the status will give you more information with a pop-up tooltip. You can see what the import ID was. And then you also have actions. The first action there is an edit standard button. We provided that here because there are some vendors that are national vendors that don't include standards in their packages. If you have a vendor that does not include standards in your package, you will have to go through the manual process of clicking that button and adding a standard for that question, which may require that you also crack it open and actually read the question. So keep that in mind as you go. And then we give you the delete button as well. The delete button, if you decide this item is not appropriate or this item is not aligned the way I want it to, or this item isn't the rigor that I want, you can delete that item and it will just disappear and it won't come through once you decide to release those to your district. This is an example of what a preview looks like once you click on the actual item ID. The preview shows you a gist of what the question looks like. And then you'll notice there's a little icon right here that says view TEIs as student. This really works for any question, but it's most helpful for TEIs because say you have a match table grid or a number line or something like that that's been imported, you can check that box and it removes the answers and it shows it to you the way the kid would see it. And then you can toggle back and forth between that. You can verify towards the top the DOK if it's provided, the standard. You can delete it here if you want to, but you also have previous and next buttons to just kind of cycle through and look at each of the items in the bank, just hitting next, 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 and looking at them as you go. The same thing also works for resources. If you're in the resource tab, click that item ID for the resource. You can preview the resource. And if you have pre-builts, it looks a little bit different than this because it'll actually open up and it will show you questions end over end that you scroll through rather than hitting next. And the next and previous button pass you between pre-built assessments. And then the questions are kind of listed out on like a toilet paper scroll. Overflow menu options. When you're actually in a bank, you have the three dots up near the top. I can click that and you have these options. The overflow menu, they're in line with that name of the bank as well in the table and at the top of each bank where you can edit the properties. So this is where I would go to activate the access permissions once I've vetted all the questions. Then you can go to manage imports. That's going to be where I'm going to look at the actual imports I've attempted to see if they're failing or successful. And then I can access error logs there. And then you have the delete bank. The delete bank option is the nuclear option. I put that there very intentionally on the slide deck because it will delete the entire bank and all items. But there's a caveat to that. It will not delete items that have already been attached to a test. If you have experience with using our partner banks, this is a concept you're probably familiar with in general. As items get updated in the partner banks, edits don't automatically get pushed to tests that are out there. And so what you have here is that nuclear option to just get rid of the entire bank as a whole. So be careful with that one. This is what it looks like when you go to the Manage Import screen. And on that Manage Import screen, you can see the status. I've got two here, one that's successful and 100% processed. It only had 6 items in it. None of them had issues, none of them failed. And then I have another one that's in progress. It's 84% of the way done, and there's enough items in there. It's truncated. I can't even see how many there are with my screen grab, but I can expand that column and see how many are in it. 370 have issues, 0 have failed. So I'm going to take a second to just talk about the difference between an item having an issue and an item failing. An issue means the item can be imported, but we had to do something in the code to keep the item from failing. The most common example is constructed response items. Many, many, many constructed response items that come in via QTI don't have a min score and max score assigned. Because they don't have a min score and max score assigned, we have to assign one for you in order for it to come through the system. So we just automatically pick 0 and 1 just to keep it so that the item doesn't fail. We flag those items that have issues so that you know when I add this item to a test, If I need to change the rubric score, I can do that in the test after it's been added to the test. I cannot make that edit in the custom banks themselves, which again is a similar thing to what you're used to with item banks and with the partner banks. You can't edit those in the bank, but you can edit them once they're on the test. You can also access the error logs from here, and the screen, once you access the error logs, you actually get an in-depth kind of perspective on what went wrong and what didn't. I'm going to show you that one after this screen. If you're in this bank, towards the top, you have the option to import more items. You use that option to import more items. So let's say you had 15 banks or 15 zips that you needed to put into the bank. I can do five, then do the next five, then do the next five after those are finished. And what you get when you go to add more QTI packages to an already existing bank, you get two new sets of options that you have to go through and actually make selections on. Do you want to replace existing items and do you want to restore deleted items? Those options are there because vendors update their item packages, right? So year over year, they might send you a new bundle where items have been edited, items have been added, et cetera, et cetera. If you have gone through and deleted items and you do not want already deleted items to be restored, that's where options in the third block there are really helpful. You can choose to go ahead and restore all of those deleted items or skip the deleted items and only import the new ones. And the reason that's important, the how that works is by item ID. We keep track of the item IDs you deleted. We can't bring those items back. You can always re-import the package if you want and bring those items back, but you can choose to keep them deleted or restore them on the next import. And then the one above that with replace existing items, those vendors will make updates to those items sometimes. You can choose to either keep all of the items you have in there existing because you like them, you don't want them updated, or you can choose to go ahead and replace them. And again, it does that by item ID. So if it recognizes the item ID, it'll use these settings to help you with that. I highly, highly, highly recommend that unless you have a very specific reason to change it, just keep these selections on the default options. Keep on the default options. It keeps it being from, it makes it just a little less confusing. This is what the error log actually kind of looks like. This one actually has no errors in it, but you get a list of items by ID, what type of item it was, the status of its import, and then a message on whether or not it had an issue or whether or not it failed. You have a dashboard at the top that kind of tells you about whether items are pending, valid, have issues, or failed. And you can click those, and it's like a filter, and it'll just highlight those items for you and bring them in. The error log is exportable, and this is critical. QTI packages are not guaranteed to work in our system. There are limitations, even if they follow the QTI, say 2.2 specifications. Each authoring system across vendors, that includes the vendors that make these items like HMH or some other vendor like Campfire or Canvas or something like that, they all have different capabilities. We have different capabilities than they do. If they create an item that we do not have the ability to author, we cannot accept that item. There's no way for it to render. And so we will fail those items on purpose. If the QTI package has a problem with the code, the XML is in a format we're not expecting, or there are spacing issues or those kinds of things in the XML code, we will fail those items. This error log is provided to you so that you can work with the vendor and share that error log with the vendor and say, hey, these items failed and here's why. It's in the log. They gave us the log. The vendor can choose to edit those items so that they're acceptable in our system or choose not to. That's totally up to them. I'll go ahead and tell you a general rule on this is, at least this is how I would do it if I were in a district position still. If I only see a few failed items, I'm probably not going to worry about it. If I see a lot of failed items, that's where I'm going to have to go down the decision tree. I will tell you a few failed items, there's probably nothing in our system that we can do to catch the handful of items that failed. If you see a bunch of them, reaching out to support might be a good idea because there might be something wrong with our system if many items fail. If many items fail, it's entirely possible we investigate and we're like, oh, it is an issue on our side, we can fix it. Or we might write back and say, yeah, it's a problem with the package. That's where these error logs are really going to come in handy. Now we've loaded the items in. I want to actually make a test. How do I do that once the items are in there? The first thing are going to do is go through the process of creating an assessment just like normal. You're going to name it, make the selections you need, select the campuses, select the course, etc. And then you're going to use the little plus buttons to add an item from a bank, just like you're used to doing. That entire process is unchanged. But once you've made custom banks publicly available with your access permissions, users that are authoring tests and have the ability to author tests will see a custom bank option in the choose an item bank drop-down menu. All custom banks are in that spot. So you'll click custom banks and then you'll be given the item finder like you're used to seeing. And it has a brand new filter for just custom banks where you can filter it down by custom bank if you want to, but it will pre-filter down to the content and subject that you've pre-chosen for that assessment. So say you have 8 banks for 8 different subjects, but you're making a third grade math test. You're not going to see all 8 subjects in here. You'll just see the third grade math. But if you have third grade math across a bunch of banks, it might be helpful to filter by those custom banks so only limited ones show. And that's how you're going to find those items. It'll feel really familiar as you get into it. Nothing alarming there. All right, let's hit some common questions. I saw one in the chat. I know for sure I'm about to answer that particular question. Which vendors or QTI packages does Eduphoria support? You'll notice as you go into the online help guides and other places, you're not going to find a list of packages that Eduphoria supports. I don't know that we'll ever publish one because what I can tell you a little bit maybe about which packages we tested against when we were making this, but we built it to be supportive of the QTI 2.2 and below specifications. If the vendor follows QTI 2.2 and below, odds are very, very good that we can import most of their questions. So that's the answer to that question. We don't have a list of vendors that we definitely support. What we support is QTI 2.2 and below. So ask those vendors when you're working with them, is this QTI 2.2 or 2.1 or whatever that answer is, that is a vendor we can support if they're following the QTI 2.2 specifications. How should the district handle failed items? I talked about that a little bit on the previous slide. If you have failed items, if there's just a handful, there's probably not a whole lot that can be done. It's just the nature of the beast. If you have a lot of them failing, there might be something wrong with our system. It wouldn't hurt to reach out to support or reach out to the vendor and send them the error log and see what steps might be that you could take. Can I edit imported questions? You cannot edit them inside of the custom bank interface, but you can edit them once they're added to a test. Can the district have multiple banks for district and teacher use? Absolutely. There is no limit on the number of custom banks that you can create. The only limit is how many items you want to load into each of those banks. And so go into decide what are the QTI packages I have, what's in them, and how do I want to delineate that into providing it to my people in the district. That's the only limit is how do you want to organize them and provide them. How can I hide individual custom banks, pre-built, etc.? Use those access permissions and decide, should this be a district level bank? Should this be teacher only bank? Can it be all of the above? Check those boxes on those access permissions and that will help you control who gets them. Okay, I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions that I have missed. Armando, if you see anything in the chat we need to address?
Jeremy, I think we are good. I think you can keep on going.
All right, let's rock and roll. All right, so we've used QTI, we've loaded a bunch of items, we've made some assessments. Now let's talk about the brand new stuff for student supports updates. Student supports have been updated, and here's the biggest thing. We've added new subjects. We had a ton of requests to add new subjects. The new subjects are going to help you a lot. Those of you that are with the teacher incentive allotment, et cetera, and you're dealing with a different type of accountability and trying to report certain things. Now you can assign supports to students for special education, languages other than English, elective, physical education, career and technical education, and just a generic other that we've provided. All of these are now available in the student profiles. And so when you go into the student profile and you see these options, you can check these. And if the subject has been assigned to a test that matches this, then the supports will carry over. We also have a new reporting system for supports. The reporting system for supports was really, really tedious and awful. I don't know if any of you have actually played in the supports before and tried to audit it, but if you like exported all of the supports to do an audit via a PDF or something like that, the text on it got microscopic and you had to zoom in, and it was really, really difficult to tell what was going on. We've gotten rid of that old auditing report, and instead we've moved it to the students cog, and we have a managed student support option in the settings for students now in the aware navigation. And what's going to happen is anyone with the managed student supports right, which many people in your district probably have, are going to see this option. And when they go in, they're going to click it, and they're going to get a brand new table that shows them a list of students with supports, what grade they're in, what school they're at, and then the 5 or 6 supports that we have pre-built: text to speech, content clarifier, spelling, calculator, Spanish, speech to text. All of those are going to be listed as their own columns. And then you can hover over each of those columns and see all of the subjects that are assigned. This is a great way to do a little spot check and just see who's got the supports. Do they have the ones they need? Do they not have the ones they need, etc.? We've also got at the top very robust filters. I can now filter by grade. I can filter by school. I can even filter by subjects according to the accommodation or according to the subject. And so as you're going through and trying to audit what's going on, filter this table however you want. And then you've got a magic export button on the top right. Whatever you filter this down to in this table, you can export what the table has in it. I do want to take a second and note that the student supports table itself goes through a process we call pagination, because many of you have many, many thousands of students in your districts. And so we're going to limit it to about 100 kids at a time. And also, this is worth calling out individually as well. There is a filter that you can activate. It doesn't come on pre-activated, to show students with no supports. So if you're doing a full-fledged audit, you want to go into that filter, check that box that says include students with no supports, and then you'll get every single student in your district, and you can export that for your audit as well. The export is into a CSV only, but you can print the CSV to, paper or something if you need to from there. But this is our new auditing system. Here's an example of the filters. And like I said, you go into one of the filters and say, I just want to filter spelling assistance for language arts. You can do that. And it'll show you only the kids that have spelling assistance for language arts activated. It'll show you all their other supports as well, but it'll filter just down to that. And you can see what's going on with what and make sure things are going well. Um, and this is that call out I said on the previous slide. Make sure you include students without supports, because the default is to only students with supports, but you can include those students without if you really want to. You'll notice in line with each student, there's an edit button. You click that edit button and you can manage the supports right there in the table. So if you need to make just on the fly adjustments and you notice this kid's missing something, rather than having to go back to the student profile table, find that student, open their profile, check the box, hit save, you can do it here. Just click edit for that kid, check the box, click save, and you get to pick right back up in the table right where you left off. Your filters are saved and all that. And unless you leave the table, and then you come back entirely to a different place in Aware. But you can deselect and select all the supports right there, hit save, and do this a couple of kids at a time if you need to.
Hey,
One of
Jeremy,
the, yes.
a quick question. Since you're here looking at this page here, Claudia has a question about one of the star supports is word prediction. Does Eduphoria have this capability, or is it in the works at all?
It's not currently in the works, but I highly recommend send in feature requests for that one. I've seen a few in the past for it, but feel free to email support@eduphoria.net and let them know that is a support you're interested in having. Okay, next thing, mass importing update. Mass importing has changed a little bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and make a big, big, bold, capitalized statement here. Importing for Test Hound has not changed. Everything for Test Hound is exactly the same. Okay, so nothing with Test Hound is different. What has changed is if you use the local template that we provide. The local template has been changed dramatically. The local template, rather than, and I'll use my mouse to kind of hover over here, we've got text to speech, content clarifiers, all of these supports here. We used to repeat these over and over and over for every single subject. Well, as we were adding additional subjects, like I said at the very beginning, adding additional subjects made this table just impossibly wide. Like you had for every single student just like 38 columns, sometimes more, depending on what you were doing. So instead of having the accommodations listed out repeatedly over and over and over along the top, we list the accommodations one time. We've removed all of the references to subjects out of the header, and instead we're listing subjects as its own unique column. So you'll see student ID, you'll see subject, you'll see each of the accommodations, and then everything else works like you're familiar with. Ones mean on, zero means off. Blanks typically mean off or skip, and there are settings in the student support upload that you can decide if blanks mean skip or blanks mean zero. That part hasn't changed, but you'll get the opportunity to list students multiple times, and each listing can have its own subject listed out. And so I can use the mass import to just decide, hey, I do language arts only for all of the kids. You can use this template, remove all of the references for other subjects, just have language arts, have it repeat down the column, put all your kids, drop in all the zeros and ones, do a mass import that way. Fun addition. I'm going to go back a couple of slides. Hit export on this table. You can load every single student in the district, then hit export, and it will export, and that export can be your mass import. And so if I want to mass export this and have every single student in that CSV file, then go through that CSV file and make all the tweaks and do one mass import, then I can go back to where we do the mass importing and load the exact same one I exported, and it can be my import. So a fun little thing there. So when you're doing this, think about your calendars and your timing for ARD meetings in your year, benchmark testing coming up. What does all that look like? And go through the process of auditing your student supports using this table. So the next part of we're getting near the end here. So let's talk about the last objective here. Design a district-wide workflow for verifying and updating online supports and aware that ensures compliance with local policy while minimizing administrative burden on individual teachers. That's what that table is supposed to do. Hopefully you feel like it's going to help you do that. And here's basically a rundown if you're not familiar with all of the supports that we provide. We have basic online test features, which are sometimes similar and sometimes different than student supports. We have highlighters, color themes, strike through options, zoom, resource views, references, notes, question guides, flagging items for later. These are things that just come with basic online testing. Then you have accessibility features. This is where in that Venn diagram you get a little bit of overlap with some of the student specific supports. We've got calculators, we've got lockdown browsers, we've got the line reader, we've got a ruler, we've got spelling assistance, a scratch pad, question randomization, online dictionary options, view submitted student responses and review those. Then the student specific supports, these are the things that you're getting activated because these are things specific maybe to an art or something like that. Text to speech, content clarifier, Spanish support, calculator, spelling assistance, speech to text. All of these things are optional and offered, and this is a great reference if you want to steal it and use it with training for your staff and your teachers about what is it that we provide and what's the difference between them, and when do I have to have these check boxes in the student profile checked, and when do I not have to have them, and when do I set them up in the test rather than setting them up with the student. And make sure you go through and you verify your supports regularly. And like I said, think about that timing throughout the year. What's on for my kids? What should be on for my kids? When do I need to do that? At the beginning of the year, through ARD season, just before benchmark testing, just before state testing, etc. That's it for the student supports piece. It looks like we don't have any questions or they've already been answered. I want to real quick check. Armando, do you have anything before I make the last really big and really awesome announcement?
No, Jeremy, I think people are excited for all of these changes to the student supports, and I know we are too.
Cool beans. All right, ladies and gents, you stuck with me through the end here. I have one more really fun piece of information to share with you. This has been asked for a whole bunch. Bonus, we've made a calculator update. We recently added TI calculators. I think most of you are aware of that. We don't have the TI Inspire yet. We're working with TI to actually make that possible. Hopefully, we can get that working sometime in the future. I apologize, the dog's barking. Um, Here's the big thing. We now let you select up to two calculators per assessment. Now, Desmos calculators and TI calculators are implemented differently because how the vendor supplies them to us. And because of that limitation, we can let you pick up to two calculators, one per vendor. So you can pick one Desmos calculator and one TI calculator. When you pick your calculators, the student, if you have more than one, gets an option. That's what the image on the bottom right looks like. When they click the calculator button in their online testing UI, they get to choose which calculator they want. This is really, really helpful for those districts that have campuses that use different types of calculators on their campus. Some campuses lean all in on the TI calculators. Some campuses lean all in on the Desmos calculators. And there's been a pain point when you have to do a district assessment. And when you do that district assessment, about half of your kids know how to use the calculator, and about half of your kids don't know how to use that calculator. Now you get to choose one of each, and your kids can use the one that they are more comfortable with. So look out for that. This is live right now as well, as are the student supports things I just talked about. So if you have tests coming up that you want to go back and activate some student supports for on the subjects, and if you have one that math tests that you want to go activate another calculator for, hop into those tests, make those changes now, and they'll be ready for your kids the next time you give an assessment.
All right, Jeremy, there's one question from Jim. When you update the student support file within the system, will it be in effect for tests that already exist and active?
No, that is a limitation in our system, and it's something that's on our radar that we would like to eventually change. So what happens is if and this is a local vernacular that we use in Eduphoria. We call them test entries. If test entries exist, they cannot be edited in terms of supports and that sort of thing unless the test entry is deleted. You can think of a test entry as like an answer sheet. It used to be the things you printed out and had the bubble sheets. Some now, if you're doing online testing, those bubble sheets, air quotes here, you can't see me doing the air quotes, but I am. Those bubble sheets exist invisibly in our system. They're not physical bubble sheets, but you can think of them as that. If those bubble sheets or if those test entries exist, they are finalized unless they are deleted. If they are deleted, then you can regenerate them with the new supports. So, Jim, if it's a test you have not given yet and kids have not actually started that test, if test entries exist, go into the author settings and go into the test, go into the administration settings, and delete all of the test entries. If you delete all of the test entries and then generate the test entries again by activating the test, then the new supports will come through. But it will not update for tests that are in flight, and I highly recommend not deleting answer sheets, not deleting test entries for any test that has kids actively testing or have tested on in the past. Did I
Perfect.
capture that right, Armando?
You did a great job, Jeremy. On behalf of Jeremy and all of Eduphoria, thank you for joining us on today's webinar from QTI to Test Day, custom item banks, and expanded student supports. Have a great day.